Yes, we are live. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Morning.
Welcome to Sunday coffee morning. What day is it?
It's
Friday.
Tuesday,
yeah, it's,
Wednesday.
One of those days. Today we've got Colin Smith with us from CJS Planning, right? Have I said this right, Colin?
Yeah. Close enough.
CJS Planning, yes.
Yeah.
And we're going to be talking all about permitted developments. So we have been working with you, Colin, for about 6-7 months, something like that.
As long as that, crikey.
No, time flies.
How time flies.
Time flies, and we're still working together. So
I know, we haven't fallen out yet. That's always a good thing.
And we have had a project in Tooting, which we didn't share too much about with a wider community, but we bought those light industrial workshops in the auction, and we bought them in the auction where we knew that one of the units, neighboring units, tried to get permitted development like 4 or 5 times, and they failed. And we still bought the property with the view that we're gonna get permitted development on this to convert the workshops into residential, and we did it. We got permitted development, and we pretty much like tripled the value of the site in 2 months in fairly stagnant market, right? So permitted developments really allow for a lot. So you do it on a daily basis. What do you see people come to you with that?
Well, the trick really with that one, it makes it sound like it was easy, but before you even go into the deal, you research it and all the background and see whether you can fix the problem. And the chap in it was a terrace of units, and you have 1 to 4, I think, of the units. And the guy who was refused, he was in number 5. And it was a fairly easy fix to actually fix it, but obviously he didn't know how, but luckily for us we did, and so we're able to resolve the problem. But that's what it's all about, really. It's not just necessarily having the tools to do the job, it's knowing what spanner fits what, thing. I know you said nuts, but I won't say that. Yeah. So that's what it's all about, really. Understanding how one bit interacts with another bit, and I think that's really what a planning consultant ought to be doing, quite honestly.
The thing I found fascinating about this one, Colin, was that the planning department was asking for an extension in time.
Yes.
And apparently, even if we had agreed to that, it wasn't something that was binding on the statutory time limit. Do you want to talk about that just give people an idea on that?
In that particular snapshot in time, we were actually really lucky, because the month, the month prior to that, the law, some judge somewhere had said that it's not lawful to actually ask for an extension of time for a prior notification application. So even if the local authority asks for one and you agree it, then they're still out of time. They got 56 days, and in truth it's actually 57 because it's the day after the 56th day, and you get it by default as long as it complies with permitted development in the first place. And then about a month after you got approval, that these, like the Supreme Higher Appeal Court or whatever it's called, they overturned that ruling. So now you can actually ask for an extension of time for a permitted development. You don't have to agree, mind you, but I think the local authority will get a very quick refusal, I would say, if you actually refused or didn't comply, shall we say, with an extension.
So actually, it's no longer a law that.
No, it's reverted back how it was.
Oh wow!
Now, irrespective of that, what was another peculiar thing was that I just wrote a very polite email to local authority to say, well, you do know that you're out of time on this, don't you? So why don't you simply just backdate the permission to the day prior to the 56 days expiring and just approve it? And it was, save a lot of people a lot of heartache and unnecessary typing of emails. And lo and behold, the very next day, we get approval. We would have been approved anyway, but it was just an interesting little thing. But no, you can't ask for an extension of time anymore. Or sorry, you can, but I would advise that you agree to it.
So
yeah.
So in terms of permitted development, how many permitted developments there is? Because I think people quite often they just refer permitted developments as office to residential conversion, or a couple of more popular ones that are being,
Wow, there's a question. Permitted developments is it's not just about residential stuff. People don't know, for example, you can extend offices. You can extend shop units subject to certain rules and limitations. And you can, as I said earlier, you can combine all the various bits and pieces to suit the job in hand, as long as you know how those various bits and pieces are bolted together. But for example, permitted development is when you change a small house or a house into a small HMO. That's permitted development. There's retail to resi. There's another retail to resi where you don't need to make any application at all. There is amusement parks, casinos, laundrettes, all changed to resi. Weird stuff, really, really weird stuff. Offices, everybody knows about that. But people don't know that you can actually divide your office building vertically to make houses rather than horizontally to make flats. And if you change an office into a house, guess what? You get even more permitted development rights. So, these things do interact. The one where class B8 storage, I think that one is expiring. Somebody will correct me, but I think it's in September. So you're running out. I think you're running out of time to make an application for that. But B1C, which is light industrial, that's going strong, as we know, because you just had.
But I think this one is also expiring in June. So B8 expired in June, end of June, because that's what and then the unit number 5 in our parade of workshops was. That one was the storage B8, and ours are B1C, and B1C currently are expiring 31st of July. So you need to make an application beforehand.
You better get on with it. Yeah. And luckily for me, another gentleman bought some adjacent units to yours. And on the strength of me getting your one passed, I was lucky enough to get the other job as well. And don't forget, the love of my life is agricultural buildings to residential. What fun you can have with that. It's really, really good stuff.
See, back in the day, I did a couple of, I just packaged them as more than doing them myself, but it was equestrian use. So there were some interesting things. I don't know if it was permitted development or I don't think.
Not equestrian, no. Keeping horses is the same as keeping a pet. So unless it ploughs a field for you, or you can eat it like they do in France, then it's not agricultural.
Yeah. They weren't eating those, I'm afraid.
No, you have headphones, and Claudia is not listening to this.
Yeah, I would be very much divorced and on the street if we even discussed that.
Moving on.
Moving on. I've been kind of paying very close attention to permitted development air rights. How close to that being a reality?
I've been asked this quite a lot recently. There's 2 very interesting permitted development rights that ought to be coming. They were ready to go just before Brexit happened. And we know what happened there. Who remembers Brexit? That's like distant history now. All the legislators were working in their great halls. You imagine, like in Hogwarts, you know, the massive hall there. They're all typing away, writing up legislation. Anyway, they all came off Brexit and were just about to get onto other things, including planning. And then this thing called COVID came along, whatever the heck that is. And yeah, so we're back to square one again. But hopefully, sometime in the autumn, perhaps, they're going to release the permitted development rights and airspace rights. At the moment, it's muted. It's not law, but we're thinking that the maximum that you'll be able to extend vertically is 5 stories in total. And they will take an average of the 2 adjacent buildings, and then you can then extend up to that line which joins the 2 of them to a maximum of 5. So if one is on one side, say 7 stories, and the other one is say 3 stories, 7 and 3 is 10, average is 5, which will be your maximum anyway. I think they're going to roll that out on blocks of flats and so on to start off with. Or residential accommodation that's above retail or an office, let's say. I think that's quite an exciting one, because you only have to look around most high streets and areas where there's almost like a sawtooth profile against the skyline. There's lots of opportunities there. So that's a really exciting one. I think a lot of people are looking forward to that. There's also going to be challenges, of course, because how the devil do you actually build these things? So I think off-site construction would then come into being, you know, build boxes in the factory and then wheel them onto site with a crane, and, you know, because you're going to put a new story on a building. It's obviously, there's, you know, a loading implication, the weight of the building. I mean, you know, these buildings weren't designed to go up 5 stories, you know. So I think that would be interesting. But yes, that I'm pretty confident that's going to happen this year. And then the second one is to do with demolishing office buildings and replacing them with residential. Now that came about because some office buildings look like glass boxes. So whereas you've got the permitted development right to change those into houses or flats, they don't look great. They look like glass boxes with, you know, dividing walls, not particularly aesthetically pleasing. So rather than do that, if in principle it's okay for it to be residential, then, you know, flatten it and rebuild it. And that makes a lot of sense too. So I don't know quite what's going to happen when they press the button to allow us out of isolation. You know, will the building industry suddenly ramp up and get very busy again? I don't know. You know, I feel very sorry for the small builders at the moment, or even the big builders. You know, it's very uncertain times, isn't it? So,
I mean, we go on our little walk, you know, and take the baby for a stroll. It's fairly quiet where we are at the best of times, but there's still like what I would classify as what looks to be non-essential building works. It's not like someone's getting the rest of their roof put on, or, you know, making their building weather tight. It's, you know, even it was a couple of days ago when the baby had just fallen asleep, and we're just like the happiest moment of our day. And then there's a bloody wood chipper cutting down a tree. It's like the loudest thing you're ever going to come across with a sleeping baby. Like, who the hell is doing this? Like, the tree didn't look like it was keeling over, but there seems to still be some building work taking place. But I think you're right. There's the impact there is going to be, because everything's bottlenecking, right? There's a pinch at every point, so there's going to be a massive dearth of work, and people struggling, and then there's going to be an overload of work. And not enough people to.
You know, you should not be sitting on your hands right now, waiting for the doors to open. You should be getting all your ducks in a row, get your paperwork sorted, wherever you are. I mean, you know, for me, it's to do with planning, but whatever your business is, start preparing. You know, that the world's been put on pause. This is a great opportunity to sort yourself out. Goodness sake, I'm even looking to rearrange my office, you know, because why not? So
there's a question about the office. How many baseball caps do you have?
Last time I counted, I think about 50.
50.
Roughly, yeah, 50. Every time I go somewhere, I pick up a baseball cap. So there's Clacton, there's Brian. No. But yes, yeah.
You only need 2 more, and then you've got a hat for every week of the year.
I could do that, couldn't I? Yeah. Pick a country,
Right.
put a hat on.
There's an interesting one here from Rashmi. He's asking, is the community infrastructure levy and the Section 106 social housing contribution payment payable under permitted development?
S106 isn't. That's one of the great benefits, but it's also one of the thorn in the sides of the government. But SIL definitely is. Okay, any form of development over a certain size, can't remember what it is. It's certainly any new residential development that's been created, you pay SIL on. And I think any extension or alteration over 100 square meters off the top of my head, roughly. But yeah, SIL, community infrastructure levy, that is definitely payable. But S106 is not. And S106 isn't all about affordable housing or social housing. It can be other things. It can be do with traffic improvements and stuff like that. But it's an obligation to make the planning application or the planning approval more palatable to the local authority. It's like a contract. So that doesn't apply, but SIL does. Yep.
Okay.
Stuff. What's the next question?
Next question.
With double-fronted former bank premises, can you convert it part to residential? If so, how many flats are allowed?
So it's a building that has a use as being a bank.
Former bank, yeah.
A former bank, and you want to change that to resi because that's where the money is.
Yes.
Okay. Well, first of all, if it's a bank, it's probably in an older building. They usually are. So I would first of all check whether you're in a conservation area, like in a high street, they're usually in a conservation area. And I'd also check whether it's a listed building. Now, the only use class whereby you can change stuff without having a prior, well, actually there's 2 prior notifications. I won't bore you with the detail, but there's something called Class G. Now, Class G will allow you to change professional services, which is Class A2, which is what a bank is, to residential units, but on the first and upper floors. You can't do it on the ground floor. There's no limit to how many units you can have. So I think for mortgage purposes, I think the smallest area you can have is 30 square meters from memory. But you know, that doesn't give you a license to create rabbit hutches. I always say that. It's nice to build nice environments, but as far as the law is concerned, there's no limitation to how many units or how big those units should be. But if it's a bank specifically, do check if it's in a conservation area or if it's a listed building, because you will always need listed building consent, even if you're just rearranging the insides and nobody can see what you're doing. You still need consent to do that. If it's not any of those things, chances are it's probably still on a high street. If it is, you probably can't convert the downstairs so easily. There's another permitted development class called Class M, and M does allow you to convert up to 150 square meters on the ground floor, but it doesn't really work, or you're not allowed to do it in a principal shopping area. There are ways around that, whereby you can just convert a part of it and keep the character frontage and so forth. There are ways around it, but I would say banks are, tread carefully, do your due diligence on that. But Class G, if it's definitely a bank and the upstairs was definitely a bank use, ancillary storage, kept all their pound notes or whatever it was upstairs, then you can use Class G upstairs. But check if it's listed, because you will need listed building consent.
I just posted the link.
Say again,
I just posted the link to the actual legislation that deals with all those classes and
yeah. Was that planning portal?
Yeah, it's the general permitted development order.
Yeah.
And
now be careful with that, because that came out in 2015.
Yeah.
And then there was an update in 2016. There's an update in 2019. So you have to read the amendments in with that legislation, and that gets quite confusing. Class Q, for example, which is all to do with agricultural buildings, it was virtually rewritten. So if you download Class Q off of the GPDO, which you just gave the link, it'll be wrong. Make sure you find all the updates as well.
Yeah. Well, I find that, obviously the updates needs to be checked, but I find it very clear on what's required with each class, like the one that we were looking at purchasing the auction. Like we knew exactly what we have to prove and what dates and everything else, and it's easier to gather the evidence. Sometimes with planning, that's what's the most difficult, right? And knowing what needs to be provided and how to provide it in what form. But when I went through the list of things that are required, the requirements for the council to even consider whether they can approve it, it's very clear and mostly clear.
Mostly clear. Some of it is open to interpretation, which is lucky for me, because then I'm the guy who finds all the loopholes and you know, the little tricks that you can apply. But generally speaking, yes, totally, I mean, it wasn't written for the layman, but it is quite clear what they want. There's also Part W, which is in the GPDO, which Part 3 of the GPDO, and that actually explains the procedure of how you then communicate your application to the local authority and what the council are looking for, the type of, you know, information, whether you have a site plan or not, and things like that. So yeah, no, it's all there, but don't just take it on face value. Make sure you've got the up-to-date version, because it did change at least twice in memory.
I think the interesting thing, going back to Ali's question, when you're looking at a bank, I've bought and sold a fair few, probably not as many as a lot of people that join our lives and part of the communities that we were in, but always pay very close attention as to whether there is a vault in the building or not.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
I've heard stories about that.
Nightmares, absolute nightmares. Because
they weigh about 20 tons, don't they? And you can't move them. And
and you kind of, even if it is a former bank, if the bank had left, if you can get an old copy of their lease, some of them, I think it used to be HSBC, in their leases, they had the responsibility of removing the vault.
Okay.
Because they're worth a fair bit of money, you know. Solid steel, but some banks like Barclays and a couple of the old Lloyds TSBs, they would just leave them there to rot. But digging one of those things out of the internal of your building to do permitted development or any kind of planning is at the very least a bit of an arse ache.
It is. I'm near Norwich, where I'm based, and I had a meeting in Norwich in an old historic building, funny enough. And guess what? It used to be a bank. And they were taking your coats to hang them up. And what they actually did, they converted this safe into where you hang your coats. It's much easier to do that than take the thing out. It was a conversation point anyway, you know.
Well, Piot used to have an office space on
we work in Marylebone, wasn't it?
That's it, on the Marylebone Road, and the lower ground floor there was a pool table. And that was inside the old vault, and obviously they pinned the door open, but it was insane. But if you're looking at doing any kind of development to a bank, first find out if there's a vault, because not all of them have vaults. Some of them just have safe rooms. And then who is responsible for removing it, or how do you turn it into a design piece? There's always that, I guess. But there's a good question here from Vinay. Have you seen this one, Piot?
Yes. The many medical practices that are closing as GPs. GPs are working in larger health centers. Are there any permitted developments for these smaller old medical practices?
Not to residential, no. They're not.
What can you convert them into?
There are non-class. Let's look it up very quickly. Possibly retail, possibly nurseries, that sort of thing. You can certainly change them to something else that's within the same class. I believe that doctor surgeries are class D1.
D1.
So whereas it's doctor, you might turn it into a what do they call beauty therapy? Is it? And things like that. Something which is I wouldn't know, obviously. You're not supposed to laugh. So anything that's within the same class, then no permission is actually required. But sometimes you can change D1 to D2, which is like nurseries or bingo hall or cinema or something like that. They're much easier, but there's no residential permitted development rights for D1, unfortunately.
Okay.
Also, be careful. They might be something called an asset of community value. That is something which usually applies to pubs, but anything that the community used, like a village hall, for example, doctor surgery, it might have an ACV on it, asset of community value, and that makes things tricky as well. You need to prove that it's no longer wanted by the community, and that could be tricky. So be aware.
I dealt with an asset of community value order on a there was just like a semicircle of houses, and then right in the middle there was a little bit of greenery which apparently the kids were playing on, and the neighbouring homeowners registered the land as an asset of community value. And I had grand designs of putting like a 3-4 bedroom house on there. The plot was huge, but yeah, that got scarpered. I didn't want to wait. I think they did it about 3 or 4 years beforehand, so there was about 2 or 3 years left to run on it. Hold value didn't make sense.
No. Well, I mean, these things are put in place to protect stuff. It is frustrating for us megalomaniac developers, but it's quite frustrating. But you know, they are there for a reason. They are to protect stuff. But yeah, check that if it's an asset of community value. Okay.
Brilliant. Well, we've got one more question. We've got a couple of minutes left, and
I can hear a seagull.
It's I live in a fairly, there's like an open field outside, even though I live quite close to King's Cross, and I do have birds outside, so I don't think it's a seagull.
There's a field in King's Cross. Really?
Isn't that the field for the ladies' prison? Is that what you meant by birds?
That prison is now closed.
Okay, I was going to say it's not politically correct, PR.
And actually, it's very relevant to our Facebook Live because it's going to be developed into about 1,000 homes.
Really?
It will be demolished. It was purchased by Peabody Housing Association, and it's going to be developed into a massive development.
Wow.
So the birds are going to be gone.
So yeah, last question while we'll run into this. It's only a couple of minutes. So Graham has asked, a conservation area, are there any tricks, as Colin called them, for conservation areas, as I believe there are some PD rights?
There are some PD rights that you can use. For example, office to residential, you can do it in a conservation area. But retail to resi, generally speaking, you can't, apart from Class G that I mentioned earlier. Conservation area conservation areas also affect the rights of extensions, residential extensions. For example, you can't put them on the side of a house in a conservation area, and you can't do, I believe that's right, I don't think you can put dormer extensions in a conservation area. So there are things around it, but again, why do they protect premises in conservation areas? It's because they like the look of it. So go down the normal planning permission route and just make sure that whatever you're doing, the character is similar to what's around you. That's the trick. You know, if we could all build invisible houses, we could have planning all day long, but we can't. And we try and fit stuff in. And we try and fit stuff in that doesn't fit or looks out of place. So the trick is try and make them fit or make them pleasing in some way, okay? Conservation areas are quite tricky though, because planning officers are not the easiest people, generally speaking, to get on with. And then when they are allied with the conservation officer or the historic buildings officer, things can get quite lively. Yeah, if you are looking at doing something in a conservation area, just think logically, try and make the thing look like it was always there. That's the trick with those, really, in basic terms. Obviously, there are specialists out there that deal in conservation areas and listed buildings, and they do very, very well at it. But it is a skill, and you know, you really need to know your stuff in working in those sort of protected areas. But as far as PD is concerned, there are things that you can do in conservation areas, but most of the use type changes that we like, changes of use, they're trickier to do. But look out for Class G opportunities. Class G is wonderful.
Oh, brilliant. That's looked like a really good little nod there to people to really scrub up on their Class G. Brilliant.
Yeah. And Piotr put the link up for the GPDO. You go to Schedule 2, Part 3, Class G, and Class G has not been changed. So whatever it says there in Class G is current and up to date. Okay.
Yeah. So the link actually leads straight away to that section 3.
Okay. Excellent.
And there's all the relevant commercial to residential.
Yeah.
Commercial
Class G opportunities, you know, quite underused in my opinion. So get on with it.
Well, I think that was tons of value for everyone watching.
That's what I'm here for.
Yes, and we ran a workshop together a while ago in December, 4 months ago. Yeah. And we recorded this workshop, and I put a link up there, permitteddevelopments.co.uk. The price is reduced to £83 plus VAT for foreseeable lockdown future. Yeah. So if someone wants 7 hours of content of Colin,
all the stuff we've been talking about and a huge amount more. I also talk about how to make your planning applications more favourable to the local authority. Lots and lots of stuff. There's strategies that you can actually employ as well. Yeah. Talk about offices. I talk about bungalows. I've got a brilliant bungalow strategy. Yeah. Go and buy yourself some videos.
Brilliant. Yeah, I think permitted development, commercial property, and auctions are just like a powerhouse of.
It's synergy, mate. Synergy.
Oh. Oh.
See what I did there?
I love what you did there. That was brilliant. If no one gets the joke, Piotr's company is called Synergy Property Partners. That just brings everybody into the joke. That's beautiful. I love that. I love that.
We just operate at a completely higher level, don't we?
That's it.
No, really good. Thanks for joining us, Colin. And I know you're joining our other calls, so we'll finish it here. Thanks everyone for listening and tuning in. And we are going to be back in tomorrow at 9.
Okay.
Excellent.
Thanks a lot.
Good having you all with us. Bye-bye.
Bye.